The sliding doors of Ridgecrest Mountain Hospital usually opened to ordinary things. Patients on stretchers, family members carrying overnight bags, delivery workers pushing crates of medical supplies. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening. But on that freezing night, as the last of the night shift was gathering their coats, something enormous and white appeared in the doorway at first. The staff thought it was a trick of the light, maybe blowing snow or headlights hitting the glass wrong. But then the shape leaned forward, and the thick scent of blood hit the air like a punch. Someone gasped. Someone else dropped a clipboard. A nurse whispered, "No, no, that can't be real." But it was not a full-grown albino Bengal tiger. A creature so rare most people spend their lives never seeing one. Limped through the automatic doors and stumbled into the lobby. Her fur was pure white, glowing under the fluorescent bulbs like a living ghost. But her beauty was drowned beneath streaks of crimson pouring down her left leg. One enormous paw dragged uselessly behind her. Her breath came in trembling, shallow gasps. Her tail hung limp, and then her eyes, those shocking ruby eyes, searched the room and locked onto a single man. Jordan Hale, emergency trauma nurse. 12-hour double shift. Coffee still hot in his hand, he froze. Couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. And then the tiger took another step. Closer, closer, until she stood just inches from him. Jordan's coffee slipped from his hand and hit the floor, shattering. He barely felt the splash of hot liquid on his shoe. The tiger didn't roar. She didn't show her fangs. Instead, with a trembling whimper, she lowered her head and gently placed her bleeding paw on the toe of his boot. A plea, not a threat. Jordan's throat tightened. His pulse hammered so hard it felt like it might burst. Every rational part of his brain screamed, "Run." But his feet wouldn't move. She wasn't here to kill him, that she'd come for help. Her massive body trembled violently as she struggled to stay upright. When she blinked, her eyes didn't hold the fierceness of a predator. They held pain, fear, trust. He swallowed hard. Oh, God. A broken arrow shaft jutted from the flesh of her paw. The wound was infected, swollen, sending waves of agony up her leg. The smell of rot clung to her fur. She must have walked miles on it, alone, bleeding, pregnant. Jordan noticed her belly then, the roundness beneath her ribs, the faint shifting movement. 2 lives, maybe 3. He whispered. "You're carrying cubs." Her ears flickered weakly. He felt his heart split open. He knelt slowly, letting her see his hands, every motion controlled. If she lashed out, it would be over instantly. But the tiger didn't move. As Jordan lowered himself to the ground, she dipped her head further, bowing to him in "Oh, wild animal." "Bows. Not unless it's surrendering." Jordan extended a trembling hand and touched her forehead. Her fur was warm, silky, feverish. The tiger let out a slow, shuddering exhale and closed her eyes. She leaned into his touch as if she'd been waiting for it. Around them, the nurses and staff stood stunned. The moment felt sacred, untouchable, as though they were witnesses to something ancient and impossible. Jordan whispered, "It's okay. I'm here. I won't hurt you." He didn't know why he said it. He didn't know why she believed him. But she did. Very gently, he withdrew his hand and rose to his feet. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you taken care of." He backed away slowly, and the tiger, injured, terrified, exhausted, stood up and followed him. Not one staff member blocked the hall. Not one called animal control. They stepped aside in stunned silence, watching the enormous creature limp after Jordan, leaving a trail of blood behind her like a winding red river. Jordan walked straight into the trauma suite. The tiger paused at the threshold, sniffing the cold metal and stale antiseptic. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Jordan placed his hand on her cheek. "You're safe," he whispered. Her chest rose, fell, and she stepped inside. The room had seen horrible things: motorcycle crashes, hunting accidents, mountain rescues, but nothing like this. She limped to the operating table, looked at the steel surface, looked at Jordan. Then, painfully, slowly, she lifted her enormous body onto the table and lay on her side, exposing the injured leg completely. Jordan couldn't speak. No wild animal on earth willingly lay on an operating table. But she did, for him. The other nurses gathered quietly. No one argued. No one suggested waiting for experts. They moved around Jordan like they'd rehearsed this 100 times. He injected a local anesthetic, praying she wouldn't panic. The needle pierced her skin. The tiger tensed, released a deep rumble, and then relaxed. She trusted him enough to stay still. Jordan whispered, "Good girl. You're doing amazing." Her ruby eyes watched him, focused entirely on his face that he made the incision. Pus burst outward. Infection oozed thick and foul. The barbed arrowhead was embedded deeply, twisted cruelly into the tissue. The tiger whimpered, soft, almost human, but didn't pull away. Instead, she did something no one in that room ever forgot. She turned her head and gently laid her chin on Jordan's forearm, as if anchoring herself to the only thing keeping her from drowning in pain. Jordan bit his lip hard enough to taste blood. His vision blurred. Tears threatened to spill, but he forced his hands steady. Piece by piece, he removed the arrow fragments, cleaned every inch of infected tissue, flushed the wound until the smell lessened, stitched the pad with careful precision that he spoke to her throughout. "You're okay. You're strong. Stay with me." She listened at last. He taped in 4-line to her neck so antibiotics could flow into her bloodstream. When it was finally over, Jordan slid to the floor beside the table, shaking with exhaustion. The tiger lifted her head and studied him for a long moment. Then she extended her uninjured paw and placed it gently on his knee. Tears spilled down Jordan's cheeks that a nurse whispered, "She's thanking you." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "She is." They transformed a forgotten storage wing into a makeshift recovery den. Jordan moved a cot inside. Slept there, ate there, lived there. He couldn't explain it. He just couldn't leave her alone. That he named her Solara because her white coat shimmered like moonlit frost. Solara recovered slowly. Her temperature stabilized. She began accepting food. She allowed only Jordan to change her bandages. When he entered the room, her entire body would relax. Night. When storms howled across the mountains, Jordan would sit beside her as she pressed her head against his lap, purring in deep, resonant vibrations that shook the floor. That he talked to her, told her stories, told her she was safe, told her cubs would be okay. Sometimes he swore she understood every word. Her belly grew rounder each week. The cubs kicked gently beneath her fur. Jordan would place his ear against her side, and Solara would nudge him softly, like she was welcoming him into her family. 3 months after the surgery, Solara began pacing restlessly, breath short, muscles tight, a low, trembling rumble in her throat. Jordan felt his heart drop. "It's time." He quickly cleared blankets, dimmed the lights, spread warm towels across the floor. Solara circled twice, then collapsed beside him, pressing her massive body against his like she needed him to hold her together. Jordan whispered, "I'm right here." The first cub came minutes later, tiny, silent, snow-white. Solara cleaned it with slow, loving licks, nudged it to her belly. The second cub came 20 minutes later. This time, Solara did something that stole Jordan's breath completely. She nudged the tiny, wet, mewling cub toward him. Jordan froze as Solara's ruby eyes locked with his a silent message. "You helped me. Now meet my babies." Jordan lifted the newborn carefully in his hands, tears dripping onto its soft fur. "Hey," he whispered shakily. "Welcome to the world." Solara rumbled her approval. And that night, in a forgotten hospital wing, a bond was forged that would change everything. The weeks after the birth felt like stepping into another universe, one where time slowed down, where the walls of Ridgecrest Hospital faded away, and where the world consisted only of a white tiger, her newborn cubs, and the man she trusted more than anyone alive. Jordan practically lived in the converted storage wing. He moved his cot closer, right beside Solara's blankets, in case she needed him in the night. He woke to the soft squeaks of the cubs, the low rumbling purrs from Solara, and the warmth of the little family curled against him. The cubs, whom Jordan privately called Frost and Nova, grew fast. Frost was bold, always the first to try climbing onto Jordan's lap, always tumbling into trouble. Nova was quieter, gentler, but unbelievably curious. Every morning, he would toddle over to Jordan's shoes, nibbling on the laces like they were delicacies. Solara watched all of it with a mother's calm. She allowed Jordan to handle the cubs, clean them, even bottle feed them when her body needed rest. She never once showed a hint of aggression, not toward him, not toward the nurses who occasionally peeked in. If anything, She became even gentler, almost protective of Jordan the same way she was with her cubs, some nights, when storms thundered over the mountains. Solara would press her forehead against Jordan's shoulder, her massive body shaking at the sound. Not fear. No, it was something else. A memory. A history she could never explain. And Jordan would wrap his arms around her neck and whisper soothing words into her fur. You're safe. You're home. I promise. One night, near dawn, Jordan woke to find both cubs curled asleep across his stomach, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. Solara lay directly beside him, her head resting lightly against his knee. When she opened her eyes, she just watched him for a long, quiet moment. Something in that look carved itself into Jordan's soul. He couldn't explain it. He just knew that whatever bond existed between them had grown beyond logic, beyond instinct, beyond anything he had ever imagined. But the world outside Ridgecrest Hospital didn't sleep. And word of an albino tiger giving birth inside a mountain clinic began to spread. At first, Jordan ignored the whispers. But then a wildlife official arrived. Then a biologist. Then another. Soon, the story ran across a local newspaper, and photographers began lurking near the tree line. That was when things changed. The hospital administrator called Jordan into her office. "We can't keep them here forever," she said, her voice tight with worry. "They need to return to the wild where they belong." Jordan nodded, but it felt like swallowing glass. He spent that night sitting beside Solara, his fingers buried in her fur, watching Frost and Nova wrestle on a blanket. The thought of letting them go felt like tearing out a part of himself. Yet he knew the truth. He had known it from the beginning. Solara belonged to the wilderness. Her cubs deserved the chance to live wild, free, and strong. Still, knowing didn't make it easier. As days turned to weeks, a new wing of grief began to grow beneath Jordan's ribs. It settled deep, heavy, impossible to ignore. But he refused to show it. Whenever Solara pressed her big head against his chest, or when the cubs crawled over him like he was one of their own, that he gave them everything he could. Every last moment. Finally, the wildlife department announced the release date. Jordan barely slept the night before. He sat in the dark with Solara, letting her breathe against him, feeling her heartbeat sync with his own. When dawn came, the sky was washed in pale gray, the mountains shimmering under a sheet of frost. Rangers arrived, calm and respectful. They didn't use tranquilizers. They didn't raise their voices. They knew what this tiger meant to the hospital and what Jordan meant to her. The transport crate sat open. Ready, Solara stepped inside on her own, Frost and Nova tumbling behind her with curious chirps. Jordan walked beside the crate down the hall. Solara kept her eyes locked on him the entire way, never breaking the stare. He placed his hand gently against her cheek one last time before the doors closed. Hours later, they reached the edge of the national forest, a vast wilderness of pines, jagged cliffs, snow-dusted ridges, and hidden streams. The world where Solara belonged. Jordan felt his throat tighten so painfully he had to turn away for a moment. Then the crate opened. Solara stepped out, no hesitation. No fear. Freedom rolled off her like light off water. Frost bounded into the snow, pouncing at flakes. Nova followed more cautiously, sniffing the air, his tiny tail twitching. Jordan didn't call out to them. Didn't make a sound, he just watched. Solara lifted her head to the wind, closing her eyes as if listening to ancient voices carried across the peaks. Then she turned and walked straight to Jordan, ignoring every ranger, every official, every rule. She approached with deliberate grace and lowered her head until her forehead pressed hard against Jordan's chest, nearly knocking the breath from his lungs. Jordan wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face in her white fur. The cold air burned his eyes, but he told himself it was the wind. Solara rumbled, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through his bones. It wasn't a goodbye. Not exactly. It was a promise. After a long moment, Solara stepped back. Frost and Nova watched her, tails flicking, waiting for their mother. She walked to them, nuzzled each cub, then looked back at Jordan one last time. Then, like a ghost fading into the snow, she disappeared into the trees. Jordan stood there long after she vanished. The rangers moved quietly, respectfully. No one spoke. No one touched him. They all understood. Something sacred had just ended. Days passed. Then weeks. Winter tightened its grip on Ridgecrest. The hospital bustled with flu cases, frostbite injuries, and the usual chaos of mountain life. Jordan threw himself into work, patching up hikers and treating skiers with broken limbs. But every night, when he walked to his car after a shift, he found his eyes drifting toward the tree line behind the hospital, searching for the faintest glimmer of white fur through the branches. Nothing to he told himself she was thriving. He told himself the cubs were growing strong. He told himself this emptiness in his chest would fade, but some promises carved themselves so deeply they never quite heal. Then came the night that changed everything. That a storm had settled over the mountain, dumping snow in thick, swirling waves. Most staff had already gone home. Jordan finished a late shift alone, his breath fogging in the freezing air as he locked the sliding doors that he stepped into the parking lot. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Wind whipped around the corners of the building. Then something moved at the edge of the floodlights. A shape, silent, enormous, white. Jordan froze. The figure stepped forward, and his heart nearly stopped. Solara. Her fur shimmered like newly fallen snow, unmarked and healthy. Her muscles moved with effortless grace. Her eyes glowed like rubies in the dark. She was alone. Jordan felt his knees weaken. He took a slow step forward. Solara? She walked toward him with the calm confidence of a queen. Snowflakes melted instantly against her warm fur. When she reached him, she lowered her head. Something small hung gently from her jaws. She set it at his feet. A tiny, perfect milk tooth point, one of her cub's very first. Jordan couldn't breathe. He crouched down, lifting the small tooth with shaking fingers. Solara pressed her head against his shoulder, rumbling softly, her purr vibrating through his bones. Thank you. A bond. A promise kept. Jordan buried his face in her fur and whispered, I miss you too. Solara stepped back, looked into his eyes for one last long moment, and melted into the darkness of the forest. Jordan stood there for a long time, snow falling over him, clutching the tooth that meant more than words. And that was when he understood. Some animals walk into your life by accident. Others walk in with purpose. But a few, very few, return to remind you that love, once earned, never truly leaves. To this day, on the quietest winter nights, staff swear they see a flash of white moving through the trees behind Ridgecrest Hospital, silent, watchful, keeping guard over the one human she trusted with her life. Jordan never denies it, because he feels her presence too, and he keeps the tiny milk tooth in his pocket every day. A shining reminder that what happened wasn't a miracle. It was a relationship, a promise, a forever.